My name is Liam. I'm 24 years old, tall, shy, and maybe too handsome for my own good. At least that's what Becky, my older sister, says. But I find it hard approaching ladies. Or maybe it's because I have never had any feelings for a lady before. I once dated one, but the relationship didn't last. We barely lasted 3 weeks and that was it. Becky and I have been inseparable since the day our parents passed away in a car crash 8 years ago. She's my only family and we've been through so much together. Life wasn't always easy, but we managed. Now, here I am working as the secretary to the owner of one of the biggest tech companies in the city. Sounds like a dream, right? But it's actually a nightmare. And the reason for that nightmare is my boss, Mr. Kelvin Carter. Kelvin is terrifying. He's the kind of boss who doesn't believe in compliments or second chances. If your report has one mistake, he'll tear it apart and make you redo it from scratch. I've seen some of my colleagues cry after his meetings, and I'm not even exaggerating. But despite this, I have a massive, hopeless, undeniable crush on him. The first day I walked into his office, I was captivated. He's in his late 20s, tall, well-built, and has this quiet, intimidating aura that could silence an entire room. His sharp jawline, piercing gray eyes, and neatly styled hair made my heart not stand a chance but to fall for him at that moment. But of course I can't let him know. Imagine confessing to the meanest boss in the world that you have a crush on him. He'd probably laugh me out of the building, or worse, fire me. So I kept my feelings locked away. I've only been here 2 months, and surviving under Kelvin's iron rule is hard enough already without adding love to the mix. Monday morning. The sound of my alarm jolted me awake. Becky poked her head into my room. Liam, you're going to be late. Don't forget you have a boss from hell waiting for you. Thanks for the reminder. I groaned, pulling a pillow over my face. You'll survive. She teased. And who knows? Maybe he'll actually smile today. Yeah, I wish so too. I got up, prepared myself and headed out. When I arrived at the office, Kelvin was already at his desk, looking as stoic as ever. His eyes darted up briefly as I entered. You're 2 minutes late, he said in that deep, cutting voice of his. I'm sorry, sir. It's because of the traffic. Excuses are irrelevant, Liam. He interrupted. Give me the revised quarterly report. I want it on my desk in 5 minutes, he said in a commanding tone. I had barely had time to breathe before diving into work. During lunch, my coworker Jason sat next to me. How do you deal with him? He's so strict. I don't know, I admitted. I guess I just try not to get on his bad side. Jason snorted. Good luck with that. I smiled as if to say thank you and went back to work. The next day at work, I was pulled into a high-profile meeting with Mr. Kelvin and some wealthy investors. The room was filled with the scent of expensive cologne and freshly brewed coffee, and the air buzzed with tension. As Kelvin's secretary, I sat quietly beside him, ready to take notes. The investors were older men with gray hair and designer suits, and as soon as Kelvin walked in, their eyes widened in surprise. One of them, a bald man with a booming voice, chuckled. Well, this is unexpected. I didn't think the owner of such a successful company would be so young. Kelvin's sharp gaze snapped to him. His jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm. I'm 38 years old, Kelvin said with authority. The room fell silent. The bald man blinked, clearly taken aback, and then, as if trying to suppress laughter, sipped his coffee, only to choke on it. The sound of his coughing filled the room, and one of the other investors patted his back awkwardly. I stared at Kelvin in disbelief. 38? Seriously? There was no way anyone would believe that. He looked like he was in his late 20s at most. But Kelvin didn't flinch. His face remained completely stoic, as if daring anyone to challenge him. The investors exchanged amused glances, but the meeting continued as if nothing had happened. Kelvin spoke with his usual commanding tone, discussing profits and strategies, while I sat there trying to process what had just occurred. That evening, I couldn't wait to get home and tell Becky. You're kidding? She laughed, nearly doubling over on the couch. He said he's 38? Oh my God, Liam, that's hilarious. I grinned. I'm serious. He said it with a straight face too. One of the investors almost choked, trying not to laugh. Becky wiped a tear from her eye. He probably did it so they wouldn't think he's too young to handle such a big company. You know how older men can be, always looking down on the younger generation. I thought about it for a moment and nodded. Yeah, you're probably right. Still, it was unexpected. Becky smirked, clearly enjoying the story more than she should. But then, her expression shifted to something more serious. So, she said, leaning back on the couch. Any updates on your love life? I groaned. Becky, we've been over this. I'm not looking for a relationship right now. Work is stressful enough without distractions. You always say that. She shot back. You're almost 25, Liam. You need a partner. Someone to share your life with. I rolled my eyes. I don't need a partner, Becky. I'm fine. She gave me a knowing look. You're not fine. And don't think I've forgotten how you turned down every single girl I set you up with. Remember my best friend? She was perfect, and don't even get me started on those blind dates. I felt my cheeks heat up. I told you, Becky. It's not that they weren't great. I just wasn't interested. And you know I'm not really into girls. Becky sighed dramatically, but then a mischievous glint appeared in her eyes. You know what? Next week, I'm setting you up with some good-looking guys. I know a few who might be perfect for you. My stomach dropped. What? No, Becky, that's not necessary. It's happening, Liam. You never say no to me anyway, so just accept it. I groaned, already regretting every life decision that had led to this moment. Later that night, as I lay in bed, my thoughts drifted back to Kelvin. Why was he so mean? Was there something in his past that made him this way? I couldn't stop myself from imagining what it would be like to be in a relationship with him. The idea was laughable, of course. Kelvin Carter, the cold, intimidating CEO, with someone like me? It was nothing more than a silly dream. Still, as I stared at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wish for the impossible. A few days later, I was sitting at my desk in the office, barely keeping my eyes open after another long day, when my phone buzzed. It was Becky. Don't forget your blind date tonight. You will be there by 7. I've sent you the address already. I groaned internally. Not again. I muttered under my breath. Everything all right, Liam? Jason, my coworker, asked from across the room. Yeah, just family stuff. I replied with a weak smile. I considered skipping the date altogether, but knowing Becky, she'd call me relentlessly until I went. So after work, I dragged myself to the cafe she'd mentioned. When I walked in, I immediately spotted him. He was seated at a corner table, wearing a crisp white shirt and an expensive-looking watch. He looked older, probably around 35, but still well put together. I swallowed my nerves and approached. Hi, I'm Liam, I said, forcing a smile. He looked up and smiled warmly. Nice to meet you, Liam. I'm Henry. I sat down, trying to suppress the urge to run away. Henry seemed nice enough, but I couldn't shake the awkwardness. He asked about my work, my hobbies, even my favorite movies. I answered politely, but the whole time I couldn't help feeling like we were on two different worlds. By the end of the date, Henry seemed genuinely interested, but I just couldn't feel a connection. When I got home, I texted Becky, who was still at work. The date is over. I'm not interested. Really? But Henry seemed like a nice guy, she said. He's not the one, Becky. My sister felt a bit disappointed, but I didn't care. What she didn't tell me earlier, which I later found out, was that Becky worked for a matchmaking company. Every time I went on a date, she got paid a percentage. For her, it was a win-win situation. The next week, she set me up again, this time with a man in his mid-50s. When I arrived at the restaurant and saw him, I froze. He could easily pass as my grandfather. I sat through the date, trying to be polite, but I was fuming inside. When I got home, I confronted Becky. Why would you set me up with someone who could be my grandfather? I demanded. Becky burst out laughing. Liam, he's rich. And he paid double the usual rate to go on a date with someone as handsome as you. I crossed my arms. I'm not doing this anymore, Becky. No more blind dates. Oh, come on, Liam. No, Becky. I cut her off. I'll find someone on my own in my spare time. She raised an eyebrow. You're definitely not serious. Speak to someone first? Liam, you're the shyest person I know. She wasn't wrong, but I refused to admit it. Becky eventually apologized, handing me half of the money she'd earned from the matchmaking payments. Keep it, I said, pushing the money back toward her. You need it more than I do. This was true. Becky was 5 months pregnant, and her fiancé, David, had lost his job a few months back. Money was tight for them, and although they'd planned to get married, Becky told David to focus on finding a job first. She smiled at me, her eyes softening. "You're the best brother anyone could ever have. Don't forget it," I teased, pulling her into a hug. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't help but think about Kelvin again. He was still as mean as ever at work, but for some reason I couldn't stop wishing for something more. It was a ridiculous, unrealistic dream, but it lingered all the same. When Becky called me a few days later, her voice carried that unmistakable enthusiasm that always meant trouble. "I've got the perfect guy for you this time," she chirped. "Becky, no. I'm done with blind dates." I groaned, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Oh, come on, Liam. He's rich, handsome, and I swear he's your type." I sighed heavily. "How do you even know he is my type, Becky?" "You'll know when you see him," she said confidently. "Just meet him this once and I promise if it doesn't work out, no more blind dates." I hesitated but finally relented. "Fine, but this is the last one ever." By 7 p.m. that evening, I found myself staring at the mirror, dressed in my best outfit. My dark jeans and button-up shirt fit perfectly, and I'd even styled my hair. "Why am I doing this again?" I muttered to myself. I wasn't even sure why I was putting in so much effort. Maybe because Becky had hyped this guy up so much, or maybe I just wanted to make a good impression. When I arrived at the venue, a classy rooftop bar downtown, I froze. From across the parking lot, I spotted a familiar car. My heart sank. It was Kelvin's car. I'd seen him drive it more times than his other luxurious cars. I quickly ducked behind a parked car. I tiptoed closer, peeking at the license plate. It was definitely his. The mean, no-nonsense, terrifying Kelvin was here. Why would someone like him go on a blind date? Panicked, I spotted a nearby street vendor selling masks. They were simple, cheap masks often worn by shy people or those who wanted to remain anonymous. Without thinking, I bought one for $10 and slipped it on. "Okay, Liam," I muttered to myself, "if you run into him, act cool. He won't recognize you." Taking a deep breath, I headed to the designated table Becky had sent me. To my greatest shock, Kelvin was the one there. He was sitting at the table, dressed sharply in a tailored suit, casually sipping a drink. I nearly turned and bolted, but he looked up and spotted me. His eyes narrowed slightly, then softened. "Are you my blind date?" he asked, his tone surprisingly gentle. I froze, my heart racing. I said yes and walked towards him. Kelvin glanced at my mask. "Why are you wearing that?" I fumbled for an excuse. "I'm quite shy." To my utter shock, Kelvin smiled. I sat down, my nerves barely under control. Kelvin leaned back in his chair, studying me. "What's your name?" "My name is Jerry." I lied. "Jerry." He nodded approvingly. "Nice name." I forced a smile, my palms sweating. The conversation that followed was surreal. Kelvin wasn't mean, cold, or distant. He asked about my hobbies, and to my surprise we shared several. Reading, hiking, even a love for classic movies. "Do you always wear a mask on dates?" he teased lightly. "I don't usually go on dates," I admitted, carefully dodging the truth. Kelvin smiled again, a rare sight. "You're quite interesting, Jerry." "Thanks," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. At one point he asked for my age. "I'm 26. I lied again. I didn't dare say 24. He might run a background check and discover the truth. Kelvin nodded. "I'm 28. I tried not to laugh. He told the investors he was 38 just a few days ago. Kelvin stood up after a while, extending a hand. "Well, Jerry, I hope the next time we meet you won't be too shy to take off that mask." I nodded, my heart pounding as we shook hands. His grip was firm yet warm. He handed me a business card. "Here's my number. Give me yours." Panic set in. I couldn't give him my real number. It would reveal my name immediately if he called. Thinking quickly, I gave him Becky's personal number instead. Kelvin smiled once more before walking away. As soon as he was out of sight, I ripped off the mask, gasping for air. My face was flushed and I was sweating profusely. When I got home, Becky was waiting for me, arms crossed. "Well, how'd it go?" she asked eagerly. I dropped onto the couch, groaning. It was Kelvin. Her jaw dropped. Your boss. Mr. Kelvin? The mean guy. Yeah, it's him. And he has no idea it was me. I exclaimed, recounting everything. Becky burst out laughing, clutching her stomach. Oh my God. I can't believe this. Kelvin. On a blind date? Exactly. I said, still in disbelief. Becky was really surprised. But deep down, I couldn't stop thinking about the way Kelvin had smiled at me. For the first time, I'd seen a side of him no one else at the office ever had. And I wasn't sure how to feel about it. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. My hands trembled as I typed on my keyboard, and my heart raced whenever Kelvin walked by. He hadn't even looked at me yet, but I could feel his presence, and it was overwhelming. Liam, can I talk to you for a second? Kelvin's deep voice broke through my thoughts. I froze, my hands hovering over my keyboard. Slowly, I turned to face him, forcing a smile. Yes, Mr. Kelvin? His sharp eyes studied me, and for a brief moment, I thought he might have figured it out. You've been acting weird lately. Is something wrong? No, nothing's wrong at all. I stammered, laughing nervously. Kelvin raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. All right then. If you say so. He walked away and I let out a long sigh of relief. That evening as I was sitting on the couch, Becky got a call. She glanced at the screen, her eyebrows shooting up in surprise. It's Kelvin, she said, handing me the phone. My stomach flipped. Reluctantly, I took the phone, clearing my throat to disguise my voice. Hello? Hey Jerry. Kelvin's voice was smooth, almost warm. It's me, Kelvin. Oh hi. I replied, my voice cracking slightly. I quickly coughed to mask my nerves. I was wondering when we could meet again. Kelvin said. My brain scrambled for an excuse. I've been really busy with work, you know. Kelvin chuckled softly. I understand. How about this weekend? That's too sudden. I blurted, panic rising in my chest. How about next weekend instead? All right, next weekend it is. He agreed easily. But Jerry, can you do me a favor? What is it? I asked cautiously. Don't wear the mask next time. I'd like to see your face, he said with a hint of humor in his tone. My heart sank. Okay, sure. I replied weakly. Great. See you then, Kelvin said before hanging up. I sat on the couch, staring at the phone like it was a ticking time bomb. What did he say? Becky asked, leaning forward eagerly. I recounted the conversation and Becky burst out laughing. This is getting better by the day. It's not funny, Becky. I snapped. What am I supposed to do? If Kelvin sees me, he'll fire me on the spot. Becky calmed down, her expression softening. Listen, Liam. If you really like him, you need to tell him the truth. Even if he rejects you, at least you won't have to keep lying. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I don't know, Becky. What if he hates me? What if he fires me? Stop overthinking. She interrupted. You'll never know unless you try. The next day, I decided to take Becky's advice and confess the truth to Kelvin. After gathering my courage, I approached his office, my heart pounding in my chest. Mr. Kelvin, I said, knocking on his door. He looked up from his desk, his piercing eyes locking onto mine. I need to tell you something. I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. He tilted his head, his gaze softening. Go on. But as I opened my mouth to speak, my words got stuck. Kelvin looked ridiculously handsome, his sleeves rolled up, revealing his toned forearms. His slight smile was disarming and I couldn't bring myself to say it. Actually, never mind, boss. I muttered, lowering my head. Sorry for bothering you. Kelvin frowned slightly but didn't press further. All right. Let me know if you need anything. The rest of the week was torture. I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head, berating myself for chickening out. At home, Becky tried to cheer me up, but even her jokes couldn't pull me out of my funk. You've got to figure this out, Liam, she said one night, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. You can't keep living like this. I knew she was right, but I was stuck. No matter what I did, there would be consequences. And if I didn't plan carefully, I could lose everything. So I spent the weekend thinking, planning, wondering if I could face Kelvin again, and how I would tell him the truth. The cool evening air brushed against my skin as I walked into the restaurant, my mask securely in place. My heart was pounding so loudly that I was sure anyone around could hear it. This was it. The moment I had been dreading and hoping for since the last time I saw him. Kelvin was already seated, looking effortlessly handsome in a tailored suit. His smile lit up as soon as he saw me approaching. "Hey Jerry." He greeted warmly, his tone lighter than I'd ever heard before. "You look great. Sorry I'm late." I mumbled, trying to sound casual as I slid into the chair across from him. He waved a hand dismissively. "No worries. I just got here." The conversation started easily enough, but I could barely focus on his words. The reality of the situation was sinking in. This wasn't just my boss, it was Kelvin. The man I had admired, the man I loved. After a while he leaned forward, his dark eyes locked onto mine, or at least onto the mask covering my face. "So, Jerry," he began, a teasing smile playing on his lips. "What's with the mask again? Are you really that shy?" My throat tightened. I knew this moment was coming, but I wasn't ready. I could feel the sweat forming on my palms as I struggled to find the right words. "I'll take it off," I stammered. "But you have to promise me something first." His brows lifted in curiosity. "Promise what?" "That you won't be too surprised. Or angry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Kelvin chuckled, his smile softening. "Angry? Why would I be angry?" "All right, I promise." I hesitated, the weight of my secret crushing me. "Before I take it off, I need to tell you something." "Okay, I'm listening," he said, leaning back in his chair, his expression open and patient. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling as they gripped the edge of the table. "From the moment I first met you, I haven't been myself. You're the most charming, caring, and unique person I've ever known. And I love you, Kelvin. I know it's crazy and I know you might not feel the same way, but I had to tell you." For a moment he said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then his lips curled into a faint smile. "Even when you see my real face, I just want you to remember this, that I love you." He nodded slowly, his gaze steady. "All right. I'll remember. Close your eyes," I said softly, my voice shaking. He raised an eyebrow but complied. "Count to 10. I instructed, my pulse pounding in my ears. He chuckled. "All right." He began counting, his deep voice steady. As he reached 9, I slowly removed the mask, my heart racing faster with each second. My hands shook as I placed it on the table, feeling utterly exposed. "You can open your eyes now." Kelvin opened his eyes, and for a moment, his expression froze. His gaze locked onto mine, and I saw the exact moment he recognized me. "Liam?" he said, his voice low and filled with disbelief. I couldn't breathe. My throat tightened as I tried to explain. "I can explain," I stammered. Kelvin leaned back, his expression a mixture of surprise and something I couldn't quite place. Was it anger? Amusement or disappointment? "You're my secretary," he said slowly, almost as if he couldn't believe the words himself. I nodded, my cheeks burning with shame. "Yes, sir, I am. And I'm sorry for lying to you, but I didn't know how else to." He held up a hand, silencing me. "You could have just told me," he said, his tone surprisingly calm. "Why go through all this?" Tears pricked at my eyes as I stared down at my hands. "Because I was scared. I thought if you knew, you'd fire me. And I didn't want to lose the chance to talk to you like this." "Well, Liam," he said, leaning forward slightly. "You're full of surprises." He was quiet for what felt like an eternity, and he stood up and said we'd talk this all over again. I sat for a while, and thereafter I went home hoping not to get fired the next day at work. At work the next day I tried to keep my head low and avoid Kelvin, but it was impossible. Late in the afternoon he called me into his office. His expression was unreadable, his tone calm yet serious. "Liam," he began, his eyes boring into mine. "Why didn't you just tell me it was you after that first date?" I looked down, unable to meet his gaze. "I was scared," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I thought you'd be angry. I didn't want to ruin anything." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. For a moment he said nothing, just staring at me as if trying to figure me out. Finally he nodded. "All right. You can go." I muttered a quick thank you and left his office, my nerves still frazzled. What I didn't know was that Kelvin wasn't just dismissing me from his office. That night as I sat on my couch, lost in thought, my phone buzzed. It was a call from Kelvin. "Liam," he said, his voice smooth and calm. "I need you to meet me somewhere. I've sent the address." I hesitated for a moment, then agreed. When I arrived at the location, my heart skipped a beat. It was a club, a lively high-end place with music thumping and lights flashing. I stepped out of the car, nervous, and called him. "Sir, I'm outside," I said, my tone as respectful as always. Within moments, Kelvin stepped out of the club and my breath caught in my throat. He looked like a prince, dressed impeccably, his confidence radiating in a way that made him even more attractive. "Liam," he said with a smirk, his gaze meeting mine. "Shall we?" Inside the club, we found a quiet corner, though the music still pulsed around us. Drinks were ordered and the conversation flowed. As the drinks kept coming, the atmosphere grew lighter. We laughed, shared stories, and let our guards down. I had never seen Kelvin this way, relaxed, open, and so utterly charming. At some point, Kelvin leaned closer, his voice low and sincere. "Liam, I've thought about everything about us. I've decided to give this a trial." His words hit me like a lightning bolt. My heart swelled with joy, and I couldn't stop the smile that spread across my face. "You mean it?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He nodded, his lips curling into a soft smile. "Yeah. Let's see where this goes." Before I could respond, he leaned in and kissed me. Deeply. Passionately, leaving just the two of us in that moment. When the night ended, we found ourselves at a luxurious hotel. The room was breathtaking, but all I could focus on was him. That night, we stayed close, our barriers completely down. The next morning, I woke up to find him still sleeping, his features soft and peaceful. He looked so different from the stern boss I had known at work. More vulnerable, almost innocent. I smiled, my heart swelling with a mix of happiness and hope. Watching him sleep, I silently wished for this relationship to be everything I had ever dreamed of. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. And as Kelvin stirred awake, his eyes meeting mine, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Please like and subscribe for more BL stories. Thanks for watching.